Chapter 1. An Invitation to Thornfield Manor. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns upon her knitting needles. She worked methodically on a pale blue cardigan, her sharp eyes occasionally glancing toward the garden, where sparrows quarrelled over breadcrumbs she had scattered that morning. The piece was interrupted by the arrival of the postman, Mr. Griggs, who handed her a cream-coloured envelope with an ornate seal. Miss Marple set down her knitting and examined it with the careful attention she gave to all matters, however small. "Well now," she murmured, slicing open the envelope with her silver letter opener, a gift from her late father. Inside was an invitation written in an elegant, flowing hand. "Dear Miss Marple, it would give me the greatest pleasure if you would join me for a weekend at Thornfield Manor. I'm hosting a small gathering of old friends and acquaintances, and I believe your presence would add considerably to the company. Tea will be served at 4 o'clock sharp on Friday. Your devoted friend, Lady Constance Ashford." Miss Marple's memory flickered back through the years. Constance Pemberton, now Lady Ashford, had been a girl of considerable spirit in their youth. They had attended the same finishing school in Switzerland, though their paths had diverged considerably since then. Constance had married into nobility and wealth, while Jane had returned to the quiet life of St. Mary Mead. "How curious," Miss Marple said aloud to her tabby cat, who had curled up on the adjacent chair. "I haven't heard from Constance in nearly 15 years. And now this sudden invitation." The cat, indifferent to human mysteries, merely yawned. Miss Marple rose and walked to her writing desk, composing a brief acceptance. As she wrote, her mind wandered to what she knew of Thornfield Manor. It was a grand estate in Sussex, surrounded by dense woods and isolated from the nearest village by some 3 miles. The Ashford family had owned it for generations, and Lord Reginald Ashford had been a prominent figure in Parliament before his retirement. By Friday morning, Miss Marple had packed her modest leather suitcase with sensible dresses, her warmest shawl, and naturally her knitting. The train journey from St. Mary Mead to Sussex was pleasant enough, though she couldn't shake a peculiar feeling of unease that had settled over her like morning mist, and the automobile that collected her from the station was driven by a taciturn chauffeur who offered no conversation beyond a curt greeting. As they wound through narrow country lanes, the landscape grew increasingly wild. Ancient oaks lined the road, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy overhead. Thornfield Manor finally emerged from behind a veil of mist, a sprawling Georgian house of honey-coloured stone with numerous chimneys piercing the grey sky. Ivy climbed its walls with the tenacity of decades, and the mullioned windows seemed to watch her arrival with dark, inscrutable eyes. Lady Constance herself came to greet Miss Marple at the entrance, though the years had not been particularly kind to her. Where once had been a vivacious young woman, now stood someone considerably older, and with worry lines etched deeply around her mouth and eyes that held a desperate quality. "Jane, my dear Jane," Constance embraced her with surprising fervour. "How wonderful that you could come. I have so longed to see a friendly face." "It's lovely to see you again, Constance," Miss Marple replied, studying her hostess carefully. "Though I confess myself surprised by your invitation. It has been such a long time." A shadow passed over Lady Constance's face. "Yes, well, there are matters I wish to discuss with you, but not now. The others are already in the drawing-room for tea. Come, let me introduce you." As they walked through the marble-floored entrance hall, Miss Marple noted the portraits of stern-faced ancestors, the ticking of an enormous grandfather clock, and the faint smell of beeswax and old books that pervaded the air, and somewhere in the house a door closed with a heavy thud that echoed through the corridors. "I must warn you," Lady Constance whispered as they approached the drawing-room doors. "The atmosphere here has been rather strained lately. Family tensions, you understand." Before Miss Marple could respond, the doors were opened by a severe-looking butler, and they entered a room full of strangers whose conversations died away as all eyes turned to regard the new arrival. Miss Marple smiled pleasantly, her keen gaze taking in every detail, every expression, every subtle reaction. The game, as they say, was afoot. Chapter 2. The Gathered Company. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor was a testament to generations of wealth and refined taste. Afternoon light struggled through tall windows draped in burgundy velvet, illuminating oil paintings of hunting scenes and ancestral portraits that seemed to judge the living with disapproving eyes. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, though it did little to dispel the chill that hung in the air. A chill that Miss Marple suspected had less to do with temperature than with human emotion. "Everyone, may I present Miss Jane Marple, an old and dear friend from my school days," Lady Constance announced, her voice carrying a forced brightness. "Jane, please allow me to introduce you to the company." A portly gentleman with mutton-chop whiskers rose first, his waistcoat straining against his considerable girth. "Lord Reginald Ashford, at your service, madam. Delighted to have you at Thornfield." His smile was cordial enough, but his eyes held the calculating gleam of a man who assessed everyone's worth in pounds and influence. Beside him, a younger man remained seated, offering only a curt nod. He possessed the same aristocratic features as Lord Ashford, but with a dissipated air about him. Dark circles beneath his eyes, and a tremor in his hand, as he raised a crystal glass to his lips. "My son Henry," Lord Ashford said with poorly concealed disappointment, "my heir, such as he is." Henry's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, returning his attention to the amber liquid in his glass. "Do forgive my brother-in-law's rudeness," came a smooth voice from near the window. A striking woman in her mid-30s approached, her emerald dress perfectly tailored, her dark hair swept up in the latest fashion. "I am Victoria Ashford, Henry's wife. It's a pleasure to meet anyone who can claim Constance's affection." There was something decidedly feline about Victoria. Graceful, beautiful, and potentially dangerous. Miss Marple smiled gently and nodded her acknowledgement. "And this," Lady Constance continued, gesturing toward an elderly woman who sat ramrod straight in a high-backed chair, "is Lady Beatrice Thornbury, Reginald's aunt. She has been staying with us for the past month." Lady Beatrice examined Miss Marple through a lorgnette, her lined face expressing aristocratic disdain. "Another guest, Constance. The house grows more crowded by the day. In my time, we knew better than to fill our homes with strangers." "Jane is hardly a stranger, Aunt Beatrice," Constance replied with strained patience. A younger woman, barely out of her teens, he spoke up from the sofa where she had been pretending to read a fashion magazine. "I think it's lovely to have new company. I'm Diana Fletcher, Lord Ashford's ward. Nobody else here is any fun at all." She emphasized this last statement with a pointed look at the assembled family. "Diana, please," murmured a thin, nervous-looking man who had been standing in the shadows near the bookshelf. "Forgive her, Miss Marple. Youth speaks without thinking. I am Mr. Edmund Price, the family solicitor. I'm here on business matters, though Lady Constance was kind enough to extend hospitality for the weekend." The final member of the company stepped forward from near the tea service, a woman of middle years with iron-grey hair and an efficient manner. "Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper," she introduced herself. "Lady Constance insisted I join for tea, though it's not my usual place. Will you take sugar and milk, Miss Marple?" "Just milk, thank you," Miss Marple replied, accepting the delicate china cup. As she took her seat, she surveyed the room with the practised eye of someone who had spent a lifetime observing human nature in the villages and parlours of England. The conversation resumed, but it was stilted, full of false pleasantries and pregnant pauses. Henry drank steadily, his wife Victoria watching him with barely concealed contempt. Diana fidgeted with her magazine, clearly bored. Mr. Price kept glancing at his pocket watch, as though counting the hours until he could escape. Lady Beatrice sat in judgmental silence, and Lord Ashford made loud pronouncements about politics and the declining state of modern society. Only Lady Constance seemed genuinely distressed, her teacup rattling slightly in its saucer as she raised it to her lips. "Tell me, Lady Constance," Miss Marple said gently during a lull in conversation, "how is the garden this time of year? I remember you always had such a love for roses." Constance's face softened momentarily. "The garden has been much neglected, I'm afraid. There are so many other concerns." She trailed off, catching herself. "But yes, the roses still bloom, though not as they once did. Perhaps you might take a turn about the grounds tomorrow, Jane. There is a lovely path through the woods." "That sounds delightful," Miss Marple agreed, noting how Constance's hand trembled as she set down her teacup. As the clock struck 5, a gong sounded from the entrance hall. Mrs. Blackwood rose with evident relief. "Dinner will be served at 7, she announced. "It perhaps the guests would care to rest before dressing." The company dispersed with barely concealed eagerness, like prisoners released from a sentence. As Miss Marple made her way toward the stairs, Lady Constance caught her arm. "Jane, might I have a word? In private?" But before Miss Marple could respond, a scream shattered the late afternoon quiet. A woman's scream, full of terror and shock, coming from somewhere above. The game had begun in earnest. Chapter 3. The Body in the Library. The household erupted into chaos. Footsteps thundered on the marble floors as everyone rushed toward the source of the scream. Miss Marple, despite her years, moved with surprising alacrity, her hand gripping the banister as she climbed the grand staircase behind Lord Ashford and his son Henry, and the scream had come from the library on the first floor. A magnificent room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes, their spines gleaming in the fading afternoon light. Diana Fletcher stood frozen at the doorway, her face deathly pale, one hand pressed against her mouth to stifle further cries. "Good God!" Lord Ashford exclaimed, pushing past the girl. Sprawled across the Persian rug, between a mahogany reading table and the fireplace, lay the body of Mr. Edmund Price. The solicitor's face was contorted in an expression of surprise and pain, his fingers still clutching at his chest. Beside him lay an overturned teacup, its contents, a brown liquid, seeping into the expensive carpet. Lady Constance appeared at Miss Marple's elbow, her hand flying to her throat. "Edmund, no! This cannot be!" Victoria Ashford swept into the room with the composure of someone accustomed to maintaining appearances in any circumstance. She bent briefly over the body, checking for a pulse at his neck, then straightened. "He's dead. Has been for at least 10 minutes, I should estimate." "How can you possibly know that?" Henry demanded, swaying slightly. His afternoon drinking had clearly affected his balance. "I trained as a nurse during the war. Before I married into this family, Victoria replied coolly, I know death when I see it. Mrs. Blackwood had arrived, her usual efficiency giving way to visible distress. Should I telephone for the doctor and the police? Yes, immediately, Lord Ashford commanded, attempting to assert control over the situation. Nobody is to touch anything. But this room must be secured as a crime scene, Miss Marple finished quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She had remained near the doorway, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the room. I believe, Lord Ashford, that this was not a natural death. What are you suggesting? Lady Beatrice had joined them, leaning heavily on her walking stick. That someone has murdered Edmund Price under our very roof. Miss Marple moved carefully into the room, careful not to disturb anything. She bent down, with some difficulty, near the overturned teacup and sniffed delicately at the spilled liquid. Her expression grew grave. Almonds, she murmured, a distinct scent of bitter almonds. I'm afraid this is rather serious. Bitter almonds? Henry laughed harshly. What are you? Is some sort of amateur detective from a penny dreadful? Actually, Lady Constance said quietly, Jane has a remarkable talent for unravelling mysteries. There was that dreadful business with the vicar's wife in St. Mary Mead, and the matter of the poisoned chocolates at the— This is absurd, Lord Ashford interrupted. The man clearly had a heart attack. He was always complaining about chest pains. Was he? Miss Marple asked mildly. I don't recall him mentioning any such thing at tea. Diana had been helped to a chair by Victoria, who fetched her a glass of water. The girl was shaking violently. I just came in to fetch a book, she whispered. I opened the door, and there he was, lying there like— When exactly did you find him? Miss Marple inquired gently. Just now, perhaps 2 or 3 minutes ago. I screamed immediately. And where were the rest of you when Miss Fletcher screamed? There was a moment of uncomfortable silence, as everyone realized they were being interrogated by this mild-mannered old lady in sensible shoes. Victoria spoke first. I was in my room, writing correspondence. I was in the billiard room, Henry muttered, not meeting anyone's eyes. Everyone understood he had been drinking. I was resting in my chambers, Lady Beatrice declared. At my age, one requires an afternoon repose. I had gone to the kitchen to consult with cook about dinner arrangements, Mrs. Blackwood offered. And I was showing Miss Marple to her room, Lady Constance added, before she came down again. Lord Ashford puffed out his chest. I was in my study, attending to estate business. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her eyes roaming the library once more. She noticed several things. A book lay open on the reading table, a volume of legal statutes. Mr. Price's briefcase sat beside the chair, its contents slightly disturbed, as though he had been reviewing documents. The fire had burned down to embers, suggesting it had been lit some time ago. Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Marple asked, did Mr. Price request tea to be brought to the library? The housekeeper frowned. No, Miss Marple. After the gathering in the drawing-room, no one requested anything further. I went directly to the kitchen. Then where did this tea come from? Miss Marple indicated the spilled cup and saucer, fine Wedgwood china, matching the set from which they had all taken refreshment earlier. Everyone stared at the incriminating evidence. Someone had brought Edmund Price a cup of tea. Someone who knew he would be in the library. Someone who had laced that tea with what Miss Marple strongly suspected was cyanide. The telephone rang in the distance, its shrill sound making everyone jump. That will be Dr. Morrison, Mrs. Blackwood said, hurrying from the room. "He said he would ring before setting out." As her footsteps faded down the corridor, Miss Marple turned to face the assembled company. "I'm afraid," she said with gentle firmness, "that until the police arrive, we must all consider ourselves suspects. Someone in this house is a murderer." The words hung in the air like a death sentence of their own. Chapter 4. Secrets and Suspicions. Dr. Morrison arrived within the hour, a gruff, practical man in his 60s who had served the Ashford family for 3 decades. He examined the body with clinical efficiency, while the household waited in tense silence in the drawing-room below. Miss Marple had suggested, quite firmly, that everyone remain together until the doctor had completed his examination. The fire crackled in the grate, but no one seemed to derive any comfort from its warmth. They sat scattered about the room like chess pieces, frozen mid-game, each lost in private thoughts that Miss Marple would have given much to know. Henry had helped himself to another brandy despite his wife's withering glare. Diana twisted a handkerchief in her lap, her young face still pale with shock. Lady Beatrice sat rigid as a monument, her lorgnette raised to examine each person in turn as though she might identify the murderer through sheer aristocratic scrutiny. Lord Ashford paced before the windows, his hands clasped behind his back, while Lady Constance perched on the edge of her chair like a bird prepared for flight. Mrs. Blackwood stood near the door, her usual efficiency replaced by nervous energy. She kept glancing toward the entrance hall, waiting for the doctor's verdict. Miss Marple had positioned herself near a small writing desk, ostensibly occupied with her knitting, but her needles moved slowly, and her eyes missed nothing. She had learned long ago that people revealed themselves most clearly when they believed themselves unobserved. "This is intolerable," Lord Ashford announced suddenly, breaking the oppressive silence. "That we should all be confined here like common criminals. Edmund Price was my solicitor, my trusted adviser for 15 years. Why would any of us wish him harm? Perhaps," Victoria said coolly, "it's because he knew too much." Every head turned toward her. She met their stares with perfect composure, examining her manicured nails as though she had commented on nothing more significant than the weather. "What do you mean by that?" Henry demanded, his words slightly slurred. "Simply that solicitors are repositories of family secrets, dear husband. Wills, debts, indiscretions, all the sordid details that respectable families wish to keep hidden." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm merely stating the obvious." "How dare you!" Lady Beatrice's voice cracked like a whip. "You forget yourself, Victoria. You may have married into this family, but you are not of our blood. Your opinions are neither sought nor valued." "Aunt Beatrice, please," Lady Constance interjected weakly. Miss Marple's needles paused momentarily. The family tensions, indeed. These ran far deeper than ordinary disagreements. She cleared her throat gently. "Forgive me for asking, but had Mr. Price been working on any particular matter recently? Any business that might have been contentious?" Lord Ashford stopped his pacing. "Edmund handled all our legal affairs. Estate matters, investments, that sort of thing. Nothing out of the ordinary." "He was updating your will, wasn't he, father?" Henry said suddenly, a bitter edge to his voice. "I saw him leaving your study 2 days ago with papers. You've been threatening for months to cut me off entirely." "You've given me ample reason," Lord Ashford thundered. "Your drinking, your gambling debts, your complete inability to assume any responsibility." "That's quite enough," Lady Constance said with unexpected firmness. "This is neither the time nor the place for family quarrels." Diana spoke up, her voice small. Mr. Price was helping me as well, with my inheritance from my parents. I turned 21 in 3 months, and he was explaining the terms of the trust. "A considerable fortune, I understand," Lady Beatrice observed. "Your father was quite successful in the India trade before that unfortunate fever took both your parents." "Yes," Diana whispered, £50,000. Mr. Price said I would have full control of it on my birthday." Miss Marple filed this information away carefully. £50,000 was indeed a considerable sum, enough to provide motive for many crimes. The sound of footsteps on the stairs brought everyone to attention. Dr. Morrison entered the drawing-room, his face grave. Behind him came Sergeant Wilmot from the local constabulary, a sturdy man with a thick moustache and the cautious manner of someone unaccustomed to dealing with murder in his quiet Sussex village. "Well, Doctor," Lord Ashford demanded, "what is your professional opinion?" Dr. Morrison removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly, a gesture Miss Marple recognised as one of deliberate delay. "I'm afraid there can be no doubt. Edmund Price was poisoned. The symptoms are consistent with cyanide poisoning. The almond scent Miss Marple detected, the rapidity of death, the expression on the deceased's face. He would have died within minutes of ingesting the substance." A collective gasp filled the room. Even those who had suspected murder seemed shocked by the confirmation. Sergeant Wilmot stepped forward, his notebook at the ready. I must ask all of you to remain at Thornfield Manor for the time being. No one is to leave the premises without my express permission. I'll need to interview each of you individually about your whereabouts and activities this afternoon." "This is outrageous," Lady Beatrice protested. "I am 74 years old and cannot possibly be suspected of—" "Everyone is a suspect until proven otherwise, your ladyship," the sergeant said firmly, showing more backbone than Miss Marple had initially credited him with. "Now let's begin with the person who discovered the body. Miss Fletcher, would you come with me, please?" Diana rose on trembling legs, and Victoria immediately stood as well. "I'll accompany her. The poor girl is in shock." "That won't be necessary, Mrs. Ashford." "Nevertheless, I insist. She's barely more than a child." Sergeant Wilmot looked as though he might argue, but Dr. Morrison intervened. "Perhaps it would be best, Sergeant. I can remain present as well to ensure proper procedure is followed." The three of them left with Diana, who cast a frightened glance over her shoulder as she departed. As soon as they were gone, the remaining occupants began speaking at once. Accusations, denials, protestations of innocence. Miss Marple let the noise wash over her, her mind working through what she had observed. Someone in this house had obtained cyanide, not an easy substance to acquire. Someone had prepared a cup of tea and delivered it to Edmund Price in the library, knowing it contained a lethal dose. Someone had then calmly returned to their activities, waiting for the inevitable discovery of the body. Lady Constance caught her eye across the room, and in that moment Miss Marple saw naked fear in her old friend's face. What secrets did Thornfield Manor hold, and which of them had been worth killing to protect? Chapter 5. Whispers in the Dark. The interviews conducted by Sergeant Wilmot stretched well into the evening, transforming dinner into a cold, hastily assembled affair that no one had appetite for. Miss Marple had been among the last to be questioned, and she had answered honestly, though she kept certain observations to herself. The good sergeant seemed competent enough, but she had learned from experience that country policemen, however well-meaning, sometimes lacked the imagination required to unravel the complexities of human nature. By 9:30, the household had been released to their rooms with stern warnings not to disturb the library, which had been locked and placed under guard by a young constable who looked scarcely old enough to shave. Miss Marple found herself unable to sleep. She sat by the window of her guest room, a shawl wrapped about her shoulders, watching moonlight paint silver across the overgrown gardens below. The house creaked and settled around her with the particular sounds old buildings make, sounds that could be either entirely innocent or could mask the movements of someone with murder on their mind. A soft knock at her door made her turn. "Jane, are you still awake?" Lady Constance's voice was barely above a whisper. "Come in, my dear." Lady Constance slipped inside, closing the door carefully behind her. She had removed her jewellery and let down her hair, and in the dim lamplight she looked older, more vulnerable. She took the chair opposite Miss Marple, her hands twisted together in her lap. "I couldn't sleep," she confessed. "Every time I close my eyes, I see poor Edmund lying there. Jane, I must tell you something, something I should have mentioned to Sergeant Wilmot, but I was afraid." Miss Marple set aside her knitting. "I'm listening, Constance." "Edmund came to me 3 days ago, before the other guests arrived. He was deeply troubled. He said he had discovered something in the course of reviewing the family's legal documents, something that would cause a great scandal if it became known. He wouldn't tell me what it was, said he needed to verify certain facts first, but he implied it involved someone in the household." "Did he give you any indication who?" "No, but he was frightened, Jane. I've never seen Edmund frightened before. He was always so calm, so methodical. But that day, his hands were shaking. He said he planned to confront the person concerned this weekend, to give them a chance to explain before he took the matter further." Miss Marple absorbed this information thoughtfully. "And you believe this secret, whatever it was, led to his murder? What else could it be? Oh, Jane, I invited you here because I sensed something terrible was going to happen. The atmosphere in this house has been poisonous for weeks. Reginald and Henry barely speak except to argue. Victoria treats everyone with contempt. Diana has been secretive and nervous. Even Mrs. Blackwood has been acting strangely." "In what way?" "She's been going through the household accounts obsessively, as though looking for something. And I've seen her leaving the estate at odd hours, returning with packages she won't explain." Before Miss Marple could respond, a sound from the corridor made them both freeze. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, passed by the door and continued down the hallway. "Who could that be at this hour?" Constance whispered. Miss Marple rose as quietly as her aging joints would allow and cracked open the door. The corridor was dimly lit by wall sconces, their flames casting dancing shadows. She caught a glimpse of a figure disappearing around the corner toward the main staircase. A woman in a dark dressing gown, her hair covered by a shawl. "Stay here," Miss Marple instructed, but Lady Constance had already joined her at the door. They followed at a discreet distance, with their soft slippers making no sound on the carpeted floors. The mysterious figure descended the stairs and moved through the entrance hall with the confidence of someone who knew the house intimately. She paused at the locked library door, where the young constable had dozed off in his chair, his head lolling forward. The woman produced a key from her pocket and, with infinite care, unlocked the door and slipped inside. "Good heavens!" Constance breathed. "That's Victoria!" Miss Marple placed a restraining hand on her friend's arm. "Wait, let's see what she does." They positioned themselves in the shadows near the grandfather clock, which ticked away the seconds with ponderous regularity. 5 minutes passed. 10. The constable continued to snore softly, oblivious to his failure of duty. Finally, Victoria emerged, carefully locking the door behind her and replacing the key in her pocket. But she didn't return the way she had come. Instead, she crossed to a small door beneath the staircase, the servants' entrance to the lower floors, and vanished through it. "The wine cellar," Constance murmured. "That passage leads to the wine cellar and the old servants' quarters. What on earth is she doing?" "I believe," Miss Marple said slowly, "that we should find out. But perhaps we should have reinforcements. Is your husband a sound sleeper?" "Reginald could sleep through cannon fire once he's had his evening port." "Then wake him. We may need a man's assistance if this situation becomes complicated. And bring a lamp. I suspect the cellars are not well lit." 20 minutes later, a confused and irritable Lord Ashford, hastily dressed in trousers and a smoking jacket, accompanied the two ladies down the servants' stairs. Miss Marple led the way with a lamp held high, its light revealing stone walls slick with moisture and air that smelled of earth and aged wine. The cellar was a labyrinth of passages and storage rooms carved from the bedrock on which Thornfield Manor stood. Racks of wine bottles stretched into darkness, and the temperature dropped noticeably as they descended deeper. "This is madness," Lord Ashford grumbled. "Victoria probably just wanted a bottle of wine and didn't wish to disturb anyone." But Miss Marple had stopped, her head tilted. "Listen!" Voices, low, urgent, echoed from somewhere ahead. They moved toward the sound, Lord Ashford now leading with considerably more interest. The voices grew clearer, coming from what appeared to be an old storage room whose door stood ajar. "Cannot continue like this. He's dead. Don't you understand? Dead." Victoria's voice, strained and desperate. "Keep your voice down." A man's voice, equally tense. "Everything is under control." Under control? The police are upstairs. That meddlesome old woman is asking questions. Nothing is under control. Lord Ashford's face had gone purple with rage. He threw open the door, and the lamplight revealed Victoria standing close to a man who turned in shock as they entered. It was Henry, Victoria's husband, but the scene was far more intimate than any wife should be with her spouse in a wine cellar at midnight. "What is the meaning of this?" Lord Ashford roared. But Miss Marple's eyes had gone to something else. A small leather case lying open on a barrel, its contents clearly visible in the lamplight. Glass vials, carefully labelled, and among them one vial marked with a symbol she recognized all too well, the symbol for cyanide. Chapter 6. A Tangled Web. The tableau froze as if captured in a photograph. Victoria and Henry standing guilty and exposed, Lord Ashford trembling with fury, Lady Constance pale as death, and Miss Marple calmly observing it all with her sharp, knowing eyes. "Father, I can explain," Henry began, but his voice lacked conviction. "Explain." Lord Ashford's voice cracked like thunder in the confined space. "Explain why my son and daughter-in-law are skulking about the cellars at midnight with a case of poisons. Explain why there is cyanide in that case when Edmund Price lies dead upstairs from cyanide poisoning." Victoria recovered her composure with remarkable speed. She stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "You understand nothing as usual. That case has nothing to do with Edmund's death." "Then perhaps you'd care to explain what it does have to do with," Miss Marple said mildly, moving closer to examine the leather case. "This is a medical kit, is it not? The sort a nurse might carry." "I told you I trained as a nurse during the war." Victoria replied, her voice icy. "I kept my medical supplies. There's no crime in that." "No crime in possessing cyanide," Lord Ashford sputtered. "Are you mad, woman? It's used for certain medical procedures," Victoria shot back. "And before you ask, I keep it locked in my room. Anyone could have taken it." Miss Marple bent closer to examine the vials. Her trained eye noted something significant. The seal on the cyanide vial was intact, unbroken. When did you last check this case, Mrs. Ashford?" Victoria hesitated. Several days ago. Perhaps a week." "And the seal on this particular vial was intact then?" Yes, I believe so. I always check to ensure everything is secure." "Then this is not the cyanide that killed Mr. Price," Miss Marple said simply. "The seal has never been broken. Unless, of course, you have another source of the poison." The accusation hung in the damp air. Henry moved to stand beside his wife, swaying slightly. "Victoria had nothing to do with Edmund's death. Neither did I. We were together this afternoon in her room." "In her room?" Lord Ashford's face turned an alarming shade of crimson. "Your own wife's room? Why would that require such secrecy?" The bitter laugh that escaped Henry held years of pain. "Because we haven't shared a room in 3 years, father. Because our marriage is a sham, maintained only for appearances. Because Victoria—" "Henry, don't!" Victoria warned, but he ignored her. "Because Victoria married me for my name and position, and I married her for her money. There's your precious family scandal, father. Your heir is a drunk married to a woman who despises him, and we're both trapped in this gilded prison you call Thornfield Manor." Lady Constance made a small sound of distress. "Oh, Henry, we had no idea things were so unhappy. Of course you didn't. No one sees anything in this family except what they want to see." Henry lurched toward the door. "I need air. This cellar is suffocating." Victoria moved to follow him, but Miss Marple's voice stopped her. "One moment, Mrs. Ashford. You went into the library just now. What were you looking for?" Victoria's mask of composure slipped momentarily. Edmund had certain letters, personal correspondence that he was keeping in his briefcase. I needed to retrieve them before the police found them." "Letters concerning what?" "My past. Before I married Henry, there was someone else, a doctor I worked with during the war. Edmund discovered we had been corresponding again. He threatened to tell Henry, to use it as leverage for something. I don't know what he wanted, but I couldn't let those letters fall into police hands." "Did you find them?" Miss Marple asked gently. "No, his briefcase was gone. The police must have taken it already." Victoria's shoulders sagged. "Everything is falling apart." Lord Ashford had been standing in stunned silence, but now he spoke, his voice strangely hollow. "Edmund was blackmailing you." "Not blackmail exactly. He never asked for money. But he made it clear he had information that could destroy what little remains of my reputation. And yours, by extension." Miss Marple exchanged a significant glance with Lady Constance. Edmund Price, it seemed, had been a man with many secrets and many enemies. "We must tell Sergeant Wilmot about this," Lady Constance said firmly. "All of it." "No!" Victoria's composure shattered entirely. "Don't you understand? This gives me a perfect motive for murder. The police will arrest me, and I'm innocent. I didn't kill Edmund, no matter how much I might have wanted to." "Then who did?" Lord Ashford demanded. But the question went unanswered. They made their way back through the cellars in grim silence, the lamp casting grotesque shadows on the stone walls. As they climbed the stairs to the main floor, Miss Marple's mind was working rapidly. Victoria had motive and access to cyanide, but the seal on her vial was intact. Unless she had another source, or unless she was clever enough to reseal it after use, though that seemed unlikely given the circumstances. The entrance hall was dark save for the dying fire in the grate. The young constable still dozed at his post, a fact that would no doubt cost him dearly when Sergeant Wilmot learned of it. "We should all try to get some rest," Lady Constance suggested, though her voice held no conviction. "Perhaps things will be clearer in the morning." But as they began to disperse toward their rooms, a sound made them all freeze, the distinct crash of breaking glass, coming from the floor above. "Diana's room!" Victoria gasped. "Well, that's Diana's room!" They rushed up the stairs, decorum forgotten. Diana's door stood ajar, and lamplight spilled into the corridor. Inside, the young woman stood in her nightdress, trembling violently, staring at her window where one pane had been shattered. On the floor lay a rock wrapped in paper. Lord Ashford retrieved it carefully, unwrapping the paper with shaking hands. His face went white as he read the message scrawled in crude block letters. "Stop asking questions, or you'll be next." Diana's eyes found Miss Marple's. "Someone knows we've been investigating. Someone knows, and they're warning us." "Or," Miss Marple said quietly, her voice carrying a chill that had nothing to do with the night air streaming through the broken window, "someone is trying very hard to frighten us away from the truth, which suggests we may be getting dangerously close to it." In the distance, a dog began to howl, a mournful sound that echoed across the dark grounds of Thornfield Manor, like a portent of more deaths to come. Chapter 7. The morning after dawn broke over Thornfield Manor with reluctant grey light, as though the sun itself was hesitant to illuminate what darkness the house concealed. Miss Marple had not slept. Instead, she had spent the remaining hours of the night sitting in the chair by her window, her knitting needles moving in steady rhythm, while her mind sorted through the tangled threads of the case. By 7 o'clock, she had dressed and made her way downstairs, where she found Mrs. Blackwood already at work in the breakfast room, her face drawn and weary. "Good morning, Miss Marple. I trust you managed some rest, despite the dreadful events." The housekeeper's voice was professionally courteous, but her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the silver chafing dishes. "A little, thank you. Mrs. Blackwood, might I ask you something of a personal nature?" The housekeeper stiffened. "If you must." "How long have you been in service at Thornfield Manor?" 22 years, Miss Marple. I came here as an under-housekeeper when I was barely 30. Lord Ashford promoted me after the previous housekeeper retired. Then you know this family very well indeed. You must have observed much over the years. Mrs. Blackwood's expression became carefully neutral. "A good servant observes everything and says nothing, Miss Marple. That's how one maintains a position, even when murder has been committed." The housekeeper's facade cracked momentarily. She glanced toward the door, ensuring they were alone, then leaned closer. "Mr. Price was not a good man, Miss Marple." "Oh, he seemed respectable enough on the surface, a proper solicitor with his books and his contracts. But he had a cruel streak. He enjoyed holding power over people, knowing their secrets, making them dance to his tune." "Did he have power over you?" Mrs. Blackwood's jaw tightened. "My daughter. She got herself into trouble some years back. Fell in with a bad sort in the village. There was a theft, nothing serious, but it could have gone to the magistrate. Mr. Price made it disappear, used his connections. But he never let me forget it. Little reminders, his suggestions that my position here depended on his continued goodwill. That must have been very difficult." "Difficult?" A bitter smile crossed the housekeeper's face. "It was torture, Miss Marple. Every time he visited, I had to bite my tongue while he made his veiled threats. Yes, I hated him. But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're wondering. I was in the kitchen the entire afternoon, and Cook will vouch for that." Before Miss Marple could respond, Lady Beatrice entered, leaning heavily on her walking stick. Despite the early hour, she was fully dressed in black bombazine, her silver hair perfectly arranged. "Good morning," she announced, though her tone suggested she found nothing good about it. "I trust the household has recovered from last night's melodrama. Breaking windows with threatening messages. It's like something from a cheap novel." "Nevertheless, it happened," Miss Marple replied evenly. Lady Beatrice settled herself at the head of the table with the air of one accustomed to presiding. "I've been thinking, Miss Marple, you seem to have appointed yourself the investigator of this unpleasant business. What exactly are your qualifications for such a role?" "None whatsoever, Lady Beatrice. I'm simply an old woman who has observed human nature for many years." "Human nature? Pah! What you need are facts, not observations. I have facts." She rapped her stick on the floor for emphasis. "I was awake most of yesterday afternoon. My room overlooks the entrance hall, and I saw everyone's comings and goings." Miss Marple's interest quickened. "Indeed? That could be most helpful." "I saw Edmund go into the library at 4:30. I heard the clock chime just moments before. He was carrying his briefcase, looking agitated. 10 minutes later, I saw someone else enter the library carrying a tea tray." "Who was it?" Lady Beatrice's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "That's the interesting part. I couldn't see clearly, my eyesight isn't what it was, but it was someone in dark clothing, moving quickly. Not one of the servants, I'm certain of that. The servants don't creep about like thieves." "Could you determine if it was a man or a woman?" "Medium height, slender build. Could have been either. They wore a shawl or cloak of some kind, pulled up over their head. Quite deliberate, as though they didn't wish to be recognized." The breakfast-room door opened. Ian Sergeant Wilmot entered, looking as though he too had spent a sleepless night. Behind him came a distinguished gentleman in his 50s, carrying a black medical bag. "Good morning, ladies. This is Dr. Ashton from London, a specialist in toxicology." The Chief Constable felt this case warranted expert consultation, given the prominence of those involved. Dr. Ashton nodded politely. "I've been asked to conduct a more thorough examination of the deceased and the crime scene. I understand you were among the first to view the body, Miss Marple." "I was, Doctor." "And you detected an odour of bitter almonds?" "Quite distinctly. I've encountered cyanide poisoning once before, a most unfortunate incident involving a village chemist who confused his bottles." Dr. Ashton's eyebrows rose with interest. "Then you'll understand the significance of what I'm about to share. I examined Mr. Price's body early this morning, and while cyanide was certainly present, there was something else as well. Traces of digitalis, foxglove in common terms." "Foxglove?" Sergeant Wilmot looked confused. "But that's a heart medicine, isn't it?" "In small doses, yes. In large doses, it's quite deadly. It causes irregular heartbeat, nausea, confusion. The interesting aspect is that Mr. Price had been ingesting digitalis for some time. There were chronic levels in his system. Not enough to kill him immediately, but enough to weaken his heart considerably." Miss Marple's needles had stopped moving. "Are you suggesting he was being poisoned slowly, over a period of time?" "Precisely. Someone had been administering small amounts of digitalis to Mr. Price. He perhaps in his food or drink weakening him gradually. The cyanide was simply the final stroke, quick, dramatic, but building on weeks or even months of preparation. "Good God," Lady Beatrice whispered. "This wasn't a crime of passion then. This was calculated, deliberate, cold-blooded murder." The breakfast-room door burst open, and Lord Ashford entered, his face flushed. "Sergeant, I demand to know how much longer we are to be imprisoned in our own home. This is intolerable. I'm afraid it will be some time yet, Lord Ashford. This investigation has taken on a new dimension." Behind Lord Ashford came the rest of the household. Henry and Victoria, carefully not looking at each other. Diana, her eyes red from crying. And finally, Lady Constance, who met Miss Marple's gaze with silent desperation. "Well, now that you're all assembled," Sergeant Wilmot said, "I must ask each of you, did any of you regularly prepare food or drink for Mr. Price during his visits here?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Mrs. Blackwood spoke first. "The kitchen staff prepared meals for everyone, Sergeant. No one received special treatment." "But Mr. Price often took tea alone in his room or in the study," Lady Constance added softly. "He preferred his own company when working. I would sometimes bring him a tray myself as a courtesy." Every eye turned to her. Henry laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. My, Mother the Poisoner, who would have thought?" "Henry," Lord Ashford roared, "how dare you suggest—" "I suggest nothing, Father. I merely observe that Mother had ample opportunity, as did everyone else in this damned house." Victoria moved to the window, her back to the room. "This is madness. We're all turning on each other like animals." "That," Miss Marple said quietly, "is precisely what the murderer wants. To create suspicion, confusion, fear. But murderers, in my experience, always make mistakes. And this one has made several." All eyes turned to her now. "What mistakes?" Sergeant Wilmot demanded. "The threatening note, for one. It was too theatrical, too obvious. And the timing of the cyanide poisoning. Why administer it now, after weeks of slow poisoning with digitalis? Why risk such a dramatic, attention-grabbing method when the foxglove was doing its work quietly?" "Perhaps they grew impatient," Dr. Ashton suggested. "Or perhaps," Miss Marple continued, her eyes moving from face to face, "two different people are involved. One who had been poisoning Mr. Price slowly, and another who decided to finish the job quickly, for entirely different reasons." The silence that followed was profound. Somewhere in the house, a clock began to chime 9 times, marking another hour in the deadly game being played at Thornfield Manor. Chapter 8. The Garden Path. After breakfast, Miss Marple requested permission from Sergeant Wilmot to take a walk in the gardens. The sergeant, perhaps recognizing that the elderly lady posed little flight risk, granted his approval, though he assigned the young constable to accompany her at a discreet distance. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn roses and damp earth. Miss Marple made her way along the gravel paths, apparently admiring the neglected flower beds, but her mind was far from horticultural matters. She had learned much in the past 24 hours, but the pieces refused to form a coherent picture. 2 poisoners, if her theory was correct. One patient and methodical, administering digitalis over weeks. Another impulsive or desperate, using cyanide for immediate results. But were they working together, or at cross purposes? "Miss Marple, wait, please!" She turned to find Diana hurrying down the path, a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The girl's face was pinched with cold and anxiety. "My dear child, you should be inside. It's quite chilly. I had to speak with you privately. Last night, that note through my window. It wasn't meant for me at all. It was meant for you." Miss Marple regarded her thoughtfully. What makes you say that? Because you're the one asking questions. It's investigating. I'm just a frightened girl who happened to find the body. But they threw it through my window to make it seem random, to avoid making you the obvious target. Diana's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You're in danger, Miss Marple. Whoever killed Mr. Price knows you're close to discovering the truth. And what truth might that be? Diana glanced back toward the house, ensuring they were not overheard. Mr. Price told me something the day before he died. He said my inheritance wasn't secure, that there were irregularities in how it had been managed since my parents' death. He said someone had been embezzling from the trust, and he had proof. Miss Marple's needles paused. Did he say who? No, but he promised to show me the evidence this weekend. He said he was going to confront the person responsible and give them a chance to make restitution. He was too honourable, Miss Marple. He should have gone straight to the authorities. £50,000 is a considerable sum. Someone who had been stealing from your trust would have had powerful motivation to silence Mr. Price. That's what I've been thinking, and the only people with access to my trust fund are— Diana's voice faltered. Lord Ashford serves as my guardian. He controls the trust until I come of age. The implications hung heavy in the autumn air. Lord Ashford, master of Thornfield Manor, a man of supposedly impeccable reputation, embezzling from his ward's inheritance. These are serious allegations, my dear. I know. That's why I'm so frightened. If Lord Ashford is the murderer, then no one in this house is safe. He has power, influence. Who would believe a young woman with no family against a man like him? Before Miss Marple could respond, another figure appeared on the path. Mrs. Blackwood, carrying a basket of cut flowers. Miss Diana, Lady Constance has been looking for you. She wants you to rest in your room after last night's upset. Diana cast a desperate look at Miss Marple. You will be careful, won't you? Please, I'm always careful, child. Now do as Mrs. Blackwood says. The girl hurried away, leaving Miss Marple alone with the housekeeper. They walked in silence for a moment before Mrs. Blackwood spoke. She's told you about the trust fund, hasn't she? About the missing money? Miss Marple's surprise must have shown, for the housekeeper smiled grimly. I keep the household accounts, Miss Marple. I see all the expenditures, all the income. And I've noticed discrepancies for the past 2 years. Large withdrawals that don't match any legitimate expenses. At first, I thought it was my mistake, my poor bookkeeping. But then I began to pay closer attention. And what did you discover? That someone has been systematically draining Miss Diana's trust fund. Not huge amounts at once, that would be too obvious, but regular withdrawals, disguised as legitimate expenses for her upbringing and education. Piano lessons that never happened, clothing from shops she never visited, medical treatments she never received. Did you confront Lord Ashford about this? Mrs. Blackwood's expression hardened. I mentioned the discrepancies to Mr. Price during his last visit. I thought perhaps there was some legal explanation I didn't understand. He thanked me and said he would look into it. 2 days later, he was dead. They had reached the far end of the garden, where a wrought iron gate led to a small cemetery containing generations of Ashfords. Beyond it, the woods pressed close, their branches skeletal against the grey sky. You think I'm in danger too, don't you? Mrs. Blackwood said quietly. Because